Hello, everyone. I'm Jean Rogers with the Children's Screen Time Action Network, which is a project of Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood. Welcome and thanks for being with us on today's webinar, Are Apps Manipulating Kids? Just a few housekeeping tips before we get started. We know this is a busy time of year, so we're going to make sure that this webinar is just 1 hour that you're with us. So at 15 minutes until the hour, we're going to pause and go to questions and answers so that you have the opportunity to ask our presenters questions. And then we will close right on the hour. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see two boxes. One is a chat box. The other is a Q&A box. Feel free to minimize both of those boxes if they're a distraction to you and you'd rather just focus on our presenters. And then also make sure that if you have questions for the presenters, that you type them into the Q&A box rather than the chat box. So, and I just want to let you know, we do our best within the time frame to answer as many questions as we can. Not all questions will be answered, but we'll answer as many as possible. So now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator today, David Monahan. He is our campaign manager extraordinaire here at Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood. David is the driving force behind many of our campaigns, including most recently our Facebook Messenger Kids campaign, our online preschool petition, and also the successful effort to eliminate Channel 1 from schools. David works closely with the Institute for Public Representation at Georgetown University, and welcome, David, and he will tell you more about today's presenters and our webinar.
Thanks so much, Jean, and hi, everybody. So yes, I'm David Monahan, and I manage campaign and advocacy work at Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood. In the past few years, the work that we do to educate the public about commercialism's impact on kids and to oppose corporate marketing that targets kids has increasingly focused on how big tech is targeting children in ways that impact on their healthy development and that compromise their privacy. And this has not only led us to forming the Children's Screen Time Action Network, but also doing a number of campaigns, often as part of coalitions of other advocacy groups, in order to enlighten parents, healthcare professionals, and teachers about some of the most concerning practices. Just in the past year, and just to name a few, and Jean mentioned a couple of things that we've worked on, but we have filed complaints with the Federal Trade Commission about YouTube targeting kids with marketing, about Facebook violating children's privacy, and also about the way that many kids' apps use manipulative tactics to subject children to marketing, and that's the topic of today's presentation. In all of these initiatives, CCFC has been really fortunate to have legal counsel from the Communications and Technology Clinic at the Institute for Public Representation at Georgetown Law, which is headed up by Professor Angela Campbell, who we are very fortunate to have as a member of the board of directors at CCFC. But not only does the clinic provide legal guidance, but they also provide invaluable help in kind of peeking behind the curtain to really figure out exactly how this data-driven, ad-driven business model actually operates and how that actually impacts kids every day. So in essence, not only does IPR help us to analyze the legality of things like big tech's privacy policies, but they help us to actually find where these privacy policies are hidden, which can be awfully hard, as a lot of you know. But thanks to their work, this fall, for instance, we filed a complaint which was signed by a total of 22 advocacy groups, which asked the FTC to investigate how popular kids' apps are designed to manipulate children and deceive their parents. So today we're happy to present 3 Georgetown Law students who are members of the clinic, who all worked on investigating and analyzing those issues. I'm going to introduce them to you left to right on your screen since we don't have any fancy graphics. So it's my pleasure to introduce Allegra Kauffman, Bridget O'Connell, and Rachel Johns.
We're so thankful to be here. Thank you so much for having us. Yeah, so we've been working with CCFC to investigate Google's representations on their Play Store regarding children's apps. And we started with a study done by the University of Michigan called Advertising in Young Children's Apps, and then really just did a deep dive into Google's Play Store. So kind of an overview of what we will be talking about today. We're really just focusing on Google's representations that apps within the family section of their Play Store are appropriate for children. And we found that they were not appropriate for children because they were not complying with children's privacy laws in the scope of they weren't providing notice or consent. And then also they were violating Google's own advertising criteria. Some ads were inappropriate or deceptive, and they were using overly aggressive advertising. And then finally, some of the apps in their children's area had content that was inappropriate for children. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Start off just what is the Google Play Store. So the Google Play Store is the host site for pretty much all the content for any Android device. So music, books, movies, apps is all going to be in there. And they have about 2.6 million apps right now. And I did just want to take you through kind of a video of what the Play Store looks like really quick, because I know most of us have Apple devices or haven't necessarily used the Google Play Store before. So this is the just a home screen of a tablet, and we'll go ahead and open the Google Play Store. So on the home page, you can see there's different categories you can search, like top charts, editor's choice, and then also the family section, which has that little star above it. So we're going to look inside the family section and take a little bit of a deeper dive in there. Within the family section, you can view different categories such as ages for 5 and under, ages 6 to 8, also popular characters. You can also search education or action and adventure. And the developer will pick which category they want their app to be in, but Google is supposed to be checking that these are age appropriate and the like. So we're going to look at the ages 5 and under category, and within this you can see there's a lot of apps with popular children's characters like My Little Pony and Thomas the Tank Engine. And we're going to look at one app. We'll look at the My Little Pony Celebration app, and it has over 1 million downloads. It has the Google Family Star age rating on it for 5 and under, and it's also rated E for everyone. That's an ESRB rating, so we're not really going to talk about that because that's not Google's representation of it. Kind of looking more at the app, if you scroll down through the app, there's a little button that says Read More. If you click on that Read More, a description of the app opens up, and it kind of tells you all the activities that the kids can play within the app, just different games that are in there, what the game's all about. And at the bottom of that, there is app permissions. And if you click on that, it should tell you all of the different data that the app is going to access in your phone, such as Wi-Fi or camera, photos, or even geolocation. So that should all be in there. If you go back to the app home screen and you scroll down past all the reviews and you go to developer contact, that's where you can find the privacy policies for these apps. Some privacy policies will be app specific, other ones are just for the developer. So like for instance here, Hasbro is the developer for this app, and they just have one privacy policy for any kids app. So I wanted to show you this, first of all, to show you how long some of these privacy policies are. This is pretty standard, most of them are about this long. But also, I wanted to show you this because Google says that parents should review the privacy policy before downloading the app to learn how the app is collecting or using personal information. So if they're collecting geolocation and then what third parties they're sending that to, or how they're otherwise using it. So now that we've kind of seen what the Google Play Store looks like, I want to talk a little bit more about the representations Google makes about their family section. So Google says that their family section should be like a one-stop shop for anything kids related. So these apps that qualify for the family section allow for children to have any other apps weeded out, so they're not going to find anything that's inappropriate for them. And they have the stars on there to show you what age the content was designed for. And like I said, the developer usually gets to pick what age they think the content was designed for, but Google claims that it's doing its best to make sure any content with that family star meets a high standard for quality and age appropriateness. And Google also retains the right to keep or remove any different apps from its family section. So how do developers kind of get these stars? There's actually like all these different requirements that they have to meet to qualify for what Google calls its Design for Families program, which is essentially just the way that a developer gets a star on their app. So certain requirements are that they have to comply with child's privacy laws. They also have to comply with certain advertising requirements. They have to have content that's appropriate for children, and they have to have a privacy policy at the bottom of their page. So now I'll hand it over to Bridget, who's going to discuss more about how these apps are not complying with children's privacy or Google's own ad policies.
Thank you, Allegra. So children's privacy is mostly governed by the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, also known as COPPA, which provides requirements that an operator, in this case an app developer, must comply with to be compliant under the law. So the two main components that we're going to be examining are direct notice to parents and then verifiable parental consent before collecting personal information from a child. Specifically, we're going to look, as Allegra has talked about, in the Google Families section, the Design for Families program, specifically looking at ads, because the Design for Families program has certain requirements that govern those ads being child appropriate. So in order to do that, we looked at App Census, which is a collaboration between researchers and privacy advocates. App Census analyzed Android apps and reports the private and personally identifying information that the apps access and share with third parties. So the following information is going to be something that we gathered from App Census and then analyzed to see if it was COPPA compliant. So I'm going to go ahead and take you through how to use App Census. So first, you're going to go to the website, and there should be an image coming up in a second. Okay, so that's the main screen, and the website is www.appcensus.mobi. We're going to have this link posted at the end of our presentation, so don't worry if you don't have it written down right now. So in the search bar, you're going to put the app in question that you're thinking about downloading for your child. For here, we've used Caillou Kids TV, and then you're going to go ahead and search. So if you go ahead and click one more time. So once you select Caillou, what you're going to see is kind of a summary of the initial privacy thing. And what you're going to want to do is make sure that your app that you've seen in App Census matches the version of the app that you've selected. So it's going to go ahead and show you a couple things. So resources accessed, and then also resources that it requested. So if it requested a resource, that means that it had the possibility of accessing it, but it didn't. If it says resources accessed, then it actually accessed that on your phone. And then further down the page, as you can see right now, is the detected data flow, which is the type of personal information transmitted. Those would be in bold, but see, none of those were actually transmitted. So it can access your data, but they're not actually transmitted. And what you need to be concerned about is the transmission of data. So further at the bottom, you're going to see the device identifiers, which as you can see is that little thumbprint showing that it different types of identifiers. So the different ones with little bugs are the different Android information that it could be collecting. And then a little bit further down, it'll show you what it collected or transmitted, and then if that was encrypted or not. So unfortunately, and this is why we're here, many apps in the family section violate the COPPA rule. What this means is that apps are collecting personal information from children without direct notice and verifiable parental consent. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about a common COPPA violation we found, which is accessing and transmitting geolocation information from your child without giving you direct notice and obtaining advanced verifiable parental consent. So we go ahead, if we're in the Google Play Store, and we picked an app that's for ages 5 and under. In this case, it was Preschool Education Center. So then we went to App Census, and you can see that it's accessing location, and then what it's doing with that location is actually transmitting it to third parties. And again, see, this time it's bolded, the location is, so you can see that it's not only collecting that, and then it's also collecting device identifiers. And if you go even further down, it'll show you that it's sending those to third parties. And if you have questions, you can either look at what that third party is and then Google it. And then if it's unencrypted, it'll show up as a red no. So if it's sending it unencrypted, it means that anyone could try to access that data stream and then collect that information. And when it says that it's accessing geolocation and then transmitting it, we're talking down to the street level. So this is, you can identify exactly where on the street this phone is or device is when that child is playing that app. And this isn't a new problem. Google has known that many of the apps in its Designed for Families section were accessing geolocation information from at least July of 2017, when the Washington Post published an article about a large-scale study that found that roughly 57% of child-directed apps in the Google Play Store could be violating some aspect of COPPA. And again, when we looked at these apps that were in violation, we just found them in all age groups within the Designed for Families program. So now we're going to talk specifically kind of moving towards Designed for Family program requirements and looking at the ad policies. So we're going to just show some ads that came up while we played multiple different games. So as you can see, there's just so many ads that come up for gambling, for money, and just things that aren't child appropriate. Google's Designed for Family program requirements says that the ads are supposed to be appropriate for the range, the child age range that the app has said that it is, what it has that little Google star for. And it specifically, their policy states that inappropriate content includes sexually explicit content, promotion of acts that may result in serious bodily injury, and dangerous products such as alcohol. And although the ad policy imposes no specific restrictions relating to in-app purchases, Google Play does state that they reserve the right to reject apps for being overly aggressive in their commercial tactics, and that these ads must also not have deceptive content or be designed in a way that result in inadvertent clicks from child users. So such violation would be an ad wall, when if you're looking at this tablet, you can't even tell where the ad ends and begins, and it's not easy to click out of it. So we're going to go ahead and show you an example of such issues, kind of taking you through the common ones that we ran into. So one of those is host selling, which is using characters to pressure your children. So children are very emotionally trusting, and studies have shown that they pay attention to characters because they form deep attachment to these characters and view them as friends, and are more likely to do what this character suggests, which is why host selling is not allowed on television from ads. So the common issue is that this host will ask the child to either buy something or click on something that results in an ad, and will show disapproval from the child for not doing this, which again is kind of emotionally manipulating them to feel something like, I failed that character, I failed my friend by not buying or not watching this ad. So if you look at your right down there is a game called Baby Kim Dress Up and Play, which is by Tabtail, and it's for ages 6 to 12. So as you can see, the main character that you kind of play this game with, Baby Kim, she cries because she wants the blue shoes, but these shoes, as you can see, have a little like play button, and you have to, in order to get the shoes that will make her stop crying, actually watch a 20-second ad. And then if you look on your left, from a game called Caillou Checkup Doctor by Bunge Studios, which is rated ages 8 and under, once you play all these mini games that mimic a checkup, Caillou, the main character, then says, hey kids, why don't you unlock everything? But in order to unlock everything, you have to make an in-app purchase of $4.99. So then another issue is we're going to move on to hidden ads, which are ads that are not clearly distinguishable from app content. So if you look on the left is actually an image that's used in Design for Families program requirements of showing ads that are not acceptable. So these types of ads are indistinguishable from the content of the app. And so you'll see that on this left part of the image that Google has circled in red is that it's using the same type of game character, but that's actually, if you click on it, an ad. So in the same thing on the right is a game called My First High School Crush Dress Up and Love Story by Tabtail, and it's rated ages 6 to 12. In this game, players use objects to complete tasks that will allow her to get the affection of her high school crush. In this part of the game, you were doing her makeup, and as you can see, some of the eyeshadows, like the green and the purple, you can just use, but the orange and the red have a little film icon, and if you were to click on those to try to make your character have red eyeshadow, you actually have to watch an ad. And there's nothing that's clearly distinguishing those from the content of the app. It's in the same type of bar, very similar to what Google says is not allowed. Moving on, there's another one that I know children love, Olaf. So this game's called Disney's Olaf Adventures, and it's rated ages 8 and under. So the glowing cake, which is actually part of the game because you're trying to protect the glowing cake by collecting different snowflakes. If you click on the glowing cake that glows the same as the snowflakes that you collect, if you click on it, an ad actually comes up telling you to buy the purchased full version of the game. And as you can see, there's nothing distinguishing that from the app play. It literally is just in there, but it's an embedded ad, which should, under the Design for Family Plan program requirements, not be allowed. So yet another issue is hard to close ads, which are ads that are going to take up the majority of the screen without a clear way to close. So in the game, Dentist Games for Kids by AppQuiz, rated ages 8 and under, when the ad came up, it started playing this video. There's no way to X out of it. It was about a 15-second video for a game that's rated teen. And then once that video was over, then an ad for the game came up with a very small X in the left-hand corner that I, clumsy person that I am, actually couldn't close out of. I ended up being taken to the Google Play to buy that game, which is another issue because not only is the X small, but as we mentioned earlier, it's supposed to not allow inadvertent clicks, but as you can see with how small that X is, it's designed to accidentally get the child to click on that ad, take them out of the game, and because it's so small. So next thing is inappropriate ads. So Google specifically mentions alcohol and gambling as two of the things that are inappropriate for children. So during our analysis of different apps, we ran into both quite frequently and some that were a combo of both. So while playing a variety of games that were anywhere from ages 8 and under to ages 6 to 12, we ran into games that were like Find the Beer, or were gambling ones that invoke Las Vegas, or in the middle one is a gambling ad that I thought was actually quite scary, where it's a one-eyed wolf and it's these 3 pigs holding weapons. That is very obviously not geared towards children. All of these games are actually rated teen or above. Moving on, just something that you need to be aware of when you're playing free apps that are for children is that there is a cost you're paying for it being free, and most of that is ads, but some of that is also that the free version of the game won't have a lot unlocked. So if you're playing a Thomas and Friends game, that's one in the middle, only 2 of the engines are actually unlocked, and the rest of them you have to pay money in order to unlock, which, as you can see kind of further on the left, results in a lot of parent disappointment and children being hurt. And then at the Peppa Pig's app that's on the right, you can see that people are complaining, my child was upset because I couldn't play. And then if we click one more over, I'll show you what that actually looks like. So in the game, you could only play one of the 5 games for free. Otherwise, you had to, in this game, actually pay a $10 subscription fee. Which again, yes, this game is free, but it's not really free because once you download it, your child can only play a few mini games before the rest of the content is locked, which is manipulating your child into getting attached to the game, but not actually being able to play it without getting an in-app purchase. So I'm going to go ahead and take it over to Rachel, who will be talking a little bit more about how these apps aren't COPPA compliant.
Thank you. So many apps in the Play Store send other personal information collected from children to third parties. Tabtail is an example of a developer that collects a lot of children's personal information. Because Tabtail creates child-directed apps and collects personal information from children, it has to get consent from parents unless it's for Tabtail's internal operations. So that just means that the information can't be used for purposes such as tracking the activity of a specific child. Tabtail, like most developers of apps listed in the family section, typically have a single privacy policy that covers all their children's apps. Our search of the family category on the Play Store found around 250 apps by Tabtail. So Tabtail is a very big developer. And Tabtail's privacy policy states that Tabtail and third parties may passively collect a persistent device identifier from kids, and that includes an advertising identifier or a randomly generated user ID or IP address. So this statement that Tabtail doesn't collect personally identifiable information conflicts with the statement that it passively collects personal information from your child and sends it to third parties. So we used App Census to determine what information Tabtail was sending to third parties. Baby Care and Dress Up Kids Name, which is rated in the Google Play Store for children's 8 and under, shared multiple types of children's personal information. So even though Tabtail did not receive parental consent, it still collected and shared the information. So this chart here, this is from App Census. I made it as big as possible, but you still can't read it because there are just so many third parties that are being sent your child's personal information. So the left side of the screen is just an example of what company it's going. And then the middle section is what's being shared. And then on the right section is whether or not it's encrypted. So each individual row is a different type of personal information being sent to your child. And all of this information can be used to track your child. So we examined some of these third parties. The mobile advertising company InMobi is already known to the FTC. In 2015, the FTC charged InMobi trace locations of hundreds of millions of consumers, that includes children, without knowledge or consent. And they collected this for advertising purposes. The FTC alleged InMobi violated federal law by collecting information from apps clearly directed at children. The FTC negotiated an agreement preventing InMobi from further violations, charged a $4 million penalty, but it appears InMobi is still collecting personal information from children's apps developed by Tabtail. Another example of a company is Flurry. And so Flurry is a mobile analytics and advertising company, actually acquired by Yahoo back in 2014. So receiving personal information from Tabtail appears to violate Flurry's terms of service, which states that users shall not collect personal information or other information associated with users under the age of 13. So since Tabtail often transmits personal information, often used for tracking and behavioral advertising, and many of the third parties heavily engage in behavioral advertising outside of this context, Tabtail's claim they use personal information solely for internal purposes is just not plausible. So one thing we found particularly problematic is several apps in the family section failed to provide reasonable security and transfer children's information unencrypted. Now, encryption is a really important process, and it helps to safeguard a user's personal data or information, so only the intended party can access the information, or should be allowed to. So developers within Google's family section collect children's personal information, so it's essential that they comply with federal law. And federal law states an online service provider must maintain the confidentiality, security, and integrity of information they collect from children, and must take reasonable steps to release the information only to parties that are capable of maintaining its confidentiality and security. Unfortunately, many developers within the program fail to comply, and two of these developers are Hasbro and Disney. So Hasbro's privacy policy claims that it may share aggregated information or information is collected from users through the services where it's taken reasonable measures to de-identify the information. However, App Census shows that several of Hasbro's apps transmit children's personal information, and in many cases, the information was actually sent unencrypted. Love to Learn Elmo, pictured here, is an app that was made to accompany Hasbro's Love to Learn Elmo doll that is right beside the picture of the tablet. So in the Google Play Store, the Love to Learn Elmo app's actually directed to children 5 and under. And if you look on the Google Play Store, you can actually see the green star badge right in the middle of the screen. So Hasbro sent 3 types of children's personal information to third parties. One type of this personal information was actually sent unencrypted. Here's a chart outlining that. The information could be used to track a user over time across apps violating federal law. Hasbro has released a number of other apps directed to children that send children's personal information unencrypted. And in a preliminary search, we found 3 such apps involved with the children's Furby toy. And so sending this information unencrypted, it fails to take reasonable steps to release children's personal information. So Disney also doesn't take reasonable steps to secure children's personal information. App Census showed several of Disney's apps sent personal information to third parties, and in a number of instances, the information was just not encrypted. So Disney's privacy policy states that wherever your personal information is transferred, stored, or processed by us, we will take reasonable steps to safeguard the privacy of your personal information. However, this is simply not the case. So like Bridget talked about previously, the Disney app Olaf's Adventures is an app that's listed in the Play Store for children 8 and under. And Disney sent a child's personal information unencrypted. This information was unique to a single user, and it can potentially track a child against federal law. So like Hasbro, Disney sends this personal information unencrypted. And we found a number of other Disney apps listed as family-friendly that send children's personal information unencrypted as well. These actions are simply irresponsible, and they both violate COPPA. So now we're going to move it over to Allegra to talk about some inappropriate apps.
Yeah, so Google has all of these stars that they say they're monitoring, but while we were kind of looking through different apps, we definitely found a lot of apps that were just kind of on the fringe of what I think most people would consider to be appropriate for children, but they still had that star that said they were family appropriate or good for kids, you know, ages 5 and under, or the like. So a few apps that I just want to highlight show hazardous behavior. And these apps, the first one is called Ear Doctor Clinic Games, which is rated for children 6 to 12. The other ear one is also rated family friendly. And then that middle one is called Crazy Eye Clinic, Dr. X, which is rated also for children 6 to 12. And the reason I think we picked the hazardous behaviors as particularly outrageous that Google was claiming that they were still appropriate for children was that the Federal Trade Commission has long realized that children often imitate what they see on screen, especially when other children are doing the activities, and they often can't recognize risks associated with these activities. So for instance, with the eye one, children are instructed to take a tweezer and pick different things out of that eye from the other child. And well, as an adult, I think we can all realize that that's inherently dangerous. These apps are targeted at 6-year-olds who might not immediately realize like taking a tweezer to your eye or cutting hair around your ear is going to pose an immediate risk to you. So with all that being said, what can you do to better protect yourself? I think we all agree, like the first thing is you can't rely on these Google star ratings. Mm-hmm. Even though they say they're appropriate for children and they have, comply with all these different requirements. So many apps don't. So I think we recommend first just going on web census before you download an app. Make sure that what it's sending, you're comfortable with it sending, you're comfortable with the third parties it's sending it to. It can kind of be taxing to Google all of those different third parties that it's sending it to, but I think that's the first way, is recognizing that even the privacy policies might not tell you exactly who's getting that information.
And then once you download the app, before you let your child play it, I would say go ahead and play through it, see what type of ads are coming up. Is there a lot of requests for in-app purchases? Is the content appropriate and something you'd want your child participating in?
Yeah, that sort of seems like sort of common sense, but honestly, the Google Play is clearly not screening through the apps and playing through them like a child would. So it's important that parents and childcare providers make sure to play through them, because they're not being screened properly.
And CCFC also has some links that are shown up above that are also really helpful if you're trying to decide what your child should or shouldn't be playing.
And then lastly, we also just have a link to the original study that we used, advertising in young children's apps, just if you wanted to read a little bit more about that and what they found, because they actually went beyond just children's apps specifically and looked at some other ones that, while targeting kids, aren't necessarily marked as for kids. And that is all we have, so we'll open the floor to questions if we have any.
Super, thank you so much. That was really enlightening. Really appreciate the presentation, and we do have several questions, so going to just jump right on in. One question I have is, can one of you tell us a little bit more about the study? Folks at University of Michigan announced the results of a study not long ago that that addressed the practices of some of these children's apps. Can you touch just a little bit on what their findings were and how much that kind of related to the work that we've been doing on this issue?
You can take that one.
So the study that was from Jenny Radesky in the university talked a lot about ads and how there were ads, and I think 90% ads are in-app purchases. So the vast majority of them had some form of advertising or some form of in-app purchases. They also found that around 5% actually tracked your location in direct violation of COPPA. So it's there was a lot of stuff that was not so much legal as just the content was really troubling. More of the stuff that we're talking about with host selling, for example, strawberry shortcake cries if you don't buy the more expensive knife. So instead of getting the free-to-play knife, you pay $2 and then it cuts easier, or else strawberry shortcake will be upset in some way. So yeah, it just mainly sort of focuses in on how it really tries to manipulate your children beyond what's, I think, acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else you want to add.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, super. So related to that, you talked about the percentages that, you know, this is kind of common, the practices that we're seeing. And when you talk about these games that are, you know, that millions of kids, that have characters that millions of kids are familiar with, like Disney characters or Peppa Pig, you know, I'm kind of thinking of the example, you know, back in the old days, let's say if there were knockoff pajamas using a famous character, and then you found out that they weren't flame retardant, and then the big company would say, well, we didn't, you know, authorize those pajamas to be made. Kind of two-part question. One is this really common, or, you know, are we talking about like kind of knockoff unauthorized games? And related to that is, do we have any sense that any of these big companies are trying to stop any of these practices? I mean, if Disney's Olaf is there in a game that's manipulating kids, and Peppa Pig is, have we seen any evidence that these companies are stepping in to say, wait, we don't authorize people to be manipulating kids with our characters?
So to begin to answer your question, kind of with the knockoff and then with authorized. So especially the really popular games, so like Masha is a really popular YouTube channel that a lot of games feature. There's
Like,
both.
That's Masha and the Bear, is that
Yeah,
right?
Masha and the Bear, or Olaf, or Caillou. There's actually officially licensed apps that will be in the Children's Play Store, but then there's also unofficial use of this character. But we haven't actually in our research come across any attempts by those companies to take down those apps that are using their character unauthorized. And in a lot of chances, these authorized apps are violating COPPA. So look at the Olaf one, look at the Caillou one that are officially authorized and are still violating. So the problem is just kind of across the board. The pants are on fire if they're authorized or not authorized.
Right. And I guess the same with Google. We're not seeing Google do something to try to stop these practices.
No, and as both the Washington Post article and a recent New York Times article have shown, Google knows that this is a problem and they haven't taken action.
What about Apple? Can you tell, we have a question, whether Apple apps are any better? Are they COPPA compliant? What can you tell folks about that?
So we didn't actually have the opportunity to look into Apple's apps, mainly because like Web Census was only focused around Android apps. So that's really kind of what we dug into. So can't give a definitive answer on that. I wish we could.
Just how prevalent the issues are in the Google Play Store suggests that there's also going to be similar issues in Apple's App Store. However, I just caution you, if you're concerned, you have an Apple product, you want your child to play through that app first before you give it to your child, because a lot of these apps that have some type of COPPA violation usually also have a lot of ads or in-app purchases. So just think, if you're offending in one place, you're usually offending in another, and that can just kind of be a precaution you can take to protect your child.
Okay.
And
great.
yeah, while there's no large-scale Apple study, a recent New York Times article, they tested a really small sample of Apple apps, and they found problems with transmitting information there too. So even though there isn't a large study, there's evidence that apps on the Apple App Store are unfortunately doing similar things.
Yep. And I think in that University of Michigan study, there was a reference that said they focused the study on Android products, but they certainly had evidence that a lot of these problematic apps, were on Apple as well. We have a couple of questions that kind of relate to getting to plain English for the average parent who wants to know what the heck some of these things are about. And part one of that would be, if possible, can you explain in sort of plain English, what is verifiable parental consent? And then related to that, how would you kind of simplify the information to parents to talk about what geolocation, if geolocation information is being taken, what's kind of the worst case scenario? What should a parent really be worried about? I mean, hopefully the average parent is concerned just with the general concept that the privacy of their child is important and they shouldn't be giving that away, especially when it's being done kind of surreptitiously. But if a parent wants to know, well, what's the upshot of this? What could happen? Can you give us a sense of that?
You can take verifiable consent first.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and cover both of those. So verifiable parental consent there's a couple different ways, but the most common way would be, let's say you go into the App Store and you go to buy this app and it asks for your credit card. That's a common one that comes up as something that the child doesn't have access to. So like a PIN that proves that you're the parent. So, the kid, that's why like certain app stores can't save your credit card information, or they require you to put in a PIN before you buy that app, is just to show that you're in fact the parent. So that's an example of verifiable parental consent. Similar to like going to a movie with your child and buying the ticket. So there's some way to show that you're there getting the information, saying, yes, my child can have this app. And then when it comes to geolocation, so think of geolocation is going to be your location down to your street address. So that can either be kind of your Wi-Fi, where it's bouncing off and it's saying this is where that Wi-Fi is bouncing off of. It could also be your router address, which again is saying exactly where on that street you are. The issue with that is a lot of them, so as we've talked about the unencrypted nature that some of these apps are sending, is that someone else perhaps could maliciously try to gather that data, and if it's being sent unencrypted, actually collect it. And then they would know certain things about your child, including their location. So you just need to think, would you want random strangers knowing exactly where in the street your child was? No. Would you want them to know that your child went to the supermarket and now is back at home? It allows someone to essentially track your child. And even if it is being sent encrypted, it's allowing this company that they're sending the data to know exactly where your child is, to basically come up with a routine that your child is, and then use that to try to sell them things. So like, they go to school for a couple hours, then they come home. When they come home, they're probably going to be hungry. I should try to send them food ads then. It's just really giving these companies an entire picture of your child that you don't necessarily want that out there. That's very personal information about your child as they're developing that just shouldn't be widely available. So beyond that just someone's tracking your child, it also has interesting implications for just their privacy as a developing human. That's
great. That's really helpful. And I think there's a great piece in the New York Times today, actually. I'm sure you guys have seen, and a lot of the viewers have seen, about exactly what these companies can learn about us just from tracking our apps, the activity on our apps. And of course, sadly, there's not a whole lot of differentiation. If a company's not complying with COPPA, then they're learning that same kind of information about kids. And I think there was a graphic in that Times report, if you look at it online anyway, that shows a school and shows the child being dropped off at the school at 8:30 in the morning, and then there were certain locations in the school during the day, and they were in the playground. They left at 3 o'clock. Like, okay, that's a child, and you're really learning a lot of personal information about them. I think we have about 7 or 8 more minutes for questions, and so I'm actually going to mention a couple that we got that I'm not going to pose to you folks, but I think they were good questions, and I'll just mention them. They're more kind of things that we can chew on here at CCFC and in the network. One was, can we try to raise awareness about these issues through pediatricians' offices? And I think that's a great suggestion, and kind of broadening that not only to pediatricians' offices, but in schools and in school districts and PTA and in a number of ways. Another question was, how can we persuade parents to not even let kids have access to these apps to begin with? And of course, that's the safest way to avoid any of these problems, would be to do that, or at least really monitor it as you've been suggesting. But those are good questions that we can all be thinking about. Here's one that I will post to you guys. When a child presses on the button to make an in-app purchase, is money going to be taken out of a parent's account immediately just because the child pressed on that button? If you know.
Well, from what we saw, not immediately. I think there was a few different lawsuits that the FTC brought, because originally apps were doing that, where if you just clicked on something, it would automatically purchase it. But now they've gotten slightly better at, you have to put in a password for your Google account if you're trying to make a purchase. I think there is a workaround to it. We didn't look too much into this, but from what we saw, there's an option to get now essentially like gift cards from different convenience stores like 7-Eleven, where you could do that and make purchases that way, but it won't do it automatically.
And it's strange because it's the Google Play Store itself that recommends that you go and get a prepaid card, which is sort of makes me feel like you're telling the child to work around your parents and go and get a prepaid card, because it's built into the Play Store.
Google Play Store, yeah.
Which is, we thought, kind of unsettling.
Yeah.
Speaking of unsettling, the kind of disturbing apps that you address, like sticking sharp objects in your eyes and ears, do we have any evidence that Google has been, kind of screaming, "Oh my goodness, we had no idea these horrible things were on there. We're going to pull the plug tomorrow"?
We definitely don't. And I know, so we mentioned earlier, you did, David, about the YouTube Kids complaint that we filed before. And so a lot of the apps that we found had the same kind of content. And obviously Google owns YouTube as well as their Play Store. So they definitely know that this content's out there, that it's been used on their platforms before. But we haven't seen any evidence of them heavily screening any of these kids apps and taking them down when they notice something without third parties bringing, multiple apps to their attention and saying, "Hey, look at these, please take them down."
I'm looking, actually, a couple of folks have been asking about Apple, and we've already tried to answer that as best as we could. Are you familiar at all? You mentioned about the study that was first talked about in July of 2017 from Berkeley. Do we have any sense as to whether any of folks in big tech have kind of reacted to that study at all and trying to remediate some of the issues that were brought to light there?
So the Berkeley study, they actually, the people who conducted it actually sent it to Google. Mm-hmm. And Google actually responded where they were like, now that we're aware, we're going to take steps. And as you can see, that was in 2017, and we're finding all these issues. So people are definitely, the big tech companies, aware that the stuff is out here and that there's issues. The FTC also has put out 2 studies that are about how disappointing the apps are for children. So this knowledge that there are issues with apps is very widespread, and it's just no one's taking action.
I see.
And these researchers, especially the ones that work at Berkeley, have been doing presentations on this issue. They created App Census to try to get the information out. So I think you would have to pretty much blindfold yourself as an app developer and a app marketplace company to not know that there are issues out there.
Yeah. And I mean, in the case of Google, we're talking about the same folks who have said, well, YouTube is not a site for children. When we filed, with your help, the complaint earlier this year that said that Google was inappropriately tracking kids on YouTube and targeting them with advertising, their response was, well, we have small print that says YouTube's not a site for kids. Of course, it's the most popular site online for kids, and there are millions of kids watching it at this very moment. But that kind of gives you the perspective of, I think, what we're dealing with, and folks not really putting children's welfare in front of profits as we would hope that they would. But I think it's time for me to say thank you to you, a big, big thank you to the Institute for Public Representation, to Allegra, Bridget, and Rachel for doing such a great job. I think you've really enlightened folks very much, and we appreciate it so much. And Jean, if you're there, I'm going to toss it over to you to say goodbye to everyone.
Sam, can you?
We can't hear you, Jean.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my video won't.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, but hearing you is the next best thing.
I'm just going to say thank you again, as David just said. What important information we learned today. And I just want to mention to our viewers that this webinar was recorded today and will be available on the archive of the Screen Time Network. It's at screentimenetwork.org. In just a few days, you'll be getting a follow-up survey from us today, and oh, there I am. You'll be getting a follow-up survey and then a follow-up email with the link to today's webinar with this really important information to share with your colleagues, your clients, and anyone in your networking circles. And I also want to mention, please join us for our next webinar in January 14th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be having Hillary Cash and Chris Rowan, and they'll be talking about disrupting the progression from early screen use to screen addiction. Another really important topic, and you can register now at screentimenetwork.org on the webinars tab. Thanks again to everybody for attending. We get really great feedback on our webinars. Please let us know what you think. And thank you, David, also for hosting today. Bye-bye, everyone.